questions as I chat with Jennifer Ling Datchuk or at the end of our discussion. We'll take as many questions as time permits. So I'm very pleased to have with us tonight Jennifer Ling Datchuk, the daughter of a Chinese immigrant mother and a father with Russian-Irish ancestry. Datchuk's work revolves around her layered identity. Her works reveal, unpack, and counter prevailing societal pressures and norms that neither recognize nor understand her multiracial identity and unwavering feminist beliefs. Though she works primarily in ceramics, Datchuk also embraces new mediums as necessitated by her artistic visions. And these also include performance, photography, and multimedia installations. Datchuk was born in Warren, Ohio, raised in Brooklyn, New York, and currently lives in San Antonio, Texas. She is an assistant professor of studio art at Texas State University. Datchuk received her MFA in artistry from the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, and a BFA in crafts from Kent State University. Sorry, Jennifer, I always mess up artisanry.
Yeah, not a real word, so it's okay.
Her work has been the subject of numerous solo exhibitions at, among others, the Center for Contemporary Craft in Houston, Texas, Art Pace in San Antonio, where she was also an artist in residence, Women and Their Work in Austin, Blue Star Contemporary here in San Antonio, Ruiz Healy Gallery in San Antonio and New York City, as well as the American Craft Council in Minneapolis. Her work was recently acquired by the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, and the San Antonio Museum of Art, which is amazing. Congratulations. You can see her work in person right now at the San Antonio Museum of Art, where she has her work Enter the Dragon on view through the end of the year. Some of her more recent accolades include receiving the Emerging Voices Award from the American Craft Council and a United States Artist Fellowship in Craft. I am so grateful to have Jennifer here with us tonight, not only because I want to know more about her practice, but also because she is graciously taking time out of her residency at the John Michael Kohler Art Center this summer. This is an incredible residency that grants artists the time, space, and opportunity to pretty much make anything they want. And so knowing you are here with us today instead of in the studio makes me doubly grateful to you for being here tonight. So thank you, Jennifer. And welcome. I appreciate that you're here. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you to start discussing and looking at some of your work.
Oh, thank you, Elyse, for that very generous introduction, and to Ruby City and the Carver. Even though I'm not home, it feels really great to connect with y'all, and I feel a little piece of home in my heart right now. And I'm happy to share my work with you. I'm going to get this queued up. And I always like to say ni howdy from San Antonio, Texas. I think I've never identified as a Texan, but I call San Antonio home for the past 14 years. So I love this merging of being called a Chinese American Texan, which is an acronym is CAT. So I'll take that. I love it. So ni howdy and welcome. I always show this image of my work as the first slide to introduce it, and this is the piece Half, made in Jindazhen, China, the birthplace of porcelain, and it is a piece delineated with blue and white on one side and whiteness on the other, with collected hair for members of my family. I live and I identify as being half or both, half being the division of my identity, both being the multiplication. I live with the constant question, what are you? Much different than probably a lot of my cousins or my friends who navigate where are you from all the time. What are you? I am the object, something that people want to be authentic. They want authentication of my identity instead of where are you from, the subject. I find that people are rarely satisfied with my answer, and just recently and I'm always hyper aware of the questions we use to place people regionally or what box they fit in, anywhere from like what high school did you go to, what island did you grow up on, what street did you grow up on, where did your family go to the grocery store, which side of town. And then being here in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, which is a pretty small town that I keep getting, where are you from? But I don't see it as like, I don't build up a wall right away because this is such a small town. It's very obvious I'm a new person here. But I did get, where is your accent from? And I think for a second they caught themselves and they're like, well, I mean, like, I can't place your accent regionally. Like, I can always tell someone from the East Coast, West Coast, or the South. You, I can't. And I actually was like, I don't know where to start with that. But wherever this question comes up about my identity, I hope people sit and have the time to listen as I unpack all of it. Like Elyse said, I'm trained traditionally in ceramics. It is where my foundation of my art practice stems from. I fell in love with ceramics, specifically the material of porcelain. It's a cultural connector to me with its origins of it being discovered in Jinduzhen, China over 2,000 years ago. And the history of how porcelain traveled the world. It was desired, it was mystified by many, and there was a desire for this white material. And I use that as a metaphor for this desire for whiteness as a privileged racial class. In whitewash, I am washing unfired, slip cast porcelain pieces till they dissolve back into a liquid state, and then I adorn my face with this precious white material. Another part of my practice is I'm interested in the history of hair, how it is a commodification and extension of a woman's body, that women have been bought and sold all over the world. This is nothing new. I think about too as hair as a cultural, racial, and ethnic identifier, and that whatever my hair looked like, and for a majority of my life it was bangs and a bob, it made me more identifiable as Asian. And I think about how hair, like porcelain, has also traveled the world. Porcelain was considered white gold, hair is considered black gold, that it has a multi-million-dollar market, that devalues the human labor and existence of human bodies as an object that beautifies. I think about too the global migrations of hair and how Asia holds a stronghold in the hair market, and kind of like porcelain and its dualities of fragility and strength, hair also embodies that as well as anything from desirable to disgusting. And that part of me and my identity, I always thought about ways in which to erase it, to start over, and how do I disrupt it. So
He loves me.
I did it by removing the garden above my eyes.
He loves me.
As a young woman, and growing up as a young girl, I realized a lot of the nursery rhymes or expressions I was taught to me to find value and acceptance in that of men.
He loves me not.
So that daily act of plucking my eyebrows was the garden I tended to. This was something I wanted to remove and destroy and start over. And so without any eyebrows, I thought about ways in which we manufacture identity every day. And I wanted to pluck the beauty of blue and white patterns from Asian vessels and put them on my face. I think when I thought about this work, I pictured like eyebrows going down a conveyor belt as a way to manufacture, but I think in a way in which I did it was I made different eyebrow shapes on these blue and white trays of these blue and white patterns, which are printmaking transfers that go onto unfired clay forms. They are a lot of the same imagery and patterns that have been around for as long as like Asian ceramics has been. A lot of these blue and white patterns are timeless. They are the same like ginger flowers or floral patterns I see on historical forms and forms that are continued to be produced today in Jinduzhen. But really this came about on a research trip where I walked into a tattoo shop and I saw it was a tattoo shop for eyebrows and makeup, and from all the different shapes you could pick from the sign, they were all based and named after Disney princesses, and how like this Cinderella eyebrow was something I would pick and choose to adorn my face, and how this was a big aha moment in my practice where I saw these blue and white patterns that kind of loosely originated from Asia and traveled from the east to the west. And now these beauty standards of Disney princesses were traveling from the west to the east. And I saw these crisscross happening also with hair and these global migrations of beauty that I found really interesting. This was also a time in my practice where I think I was rejecting the forms in which I was taught to display ceramics, where you make something and put it on a pedestal. I think I work really hard to work against the pedestal as like a way to display or value an object. But I felt for this, so much of clay and ceramics, we talk about it in terms of the body, like the lip, the foot, the shoulder, the neck, the belly of a pot. And here I felt like I needed my image as if with my very curated haircut for this image, with these eyebrows that are stuck on with body glue, with a very much a gaze that was very similar to capturing and like really growing up in a household where we had altar photos of like our deceased loved ones. There, I was always fascinated by these photos in my home, these portraits of them where they all had this similar gaze. And then I learned later that they were their passport photos of when they first came to the United States. So very much a stoicism with like a little glimpse of hope.
Jennifer, can I ask
Yeah.
that piece? Does it exist solely as a photograph and an object, or did you wear them in public?
I did wear them every once in a while in public, but as you know, in Texas, the heat is unbearable. So they would eventually start sliding down. And like I could only wear them too when I had no eyebrows. So the pluck piece lives in video form, but there were a few times I did perform that piece in front of an audience, which plucking your eyebrows off in front of an audience is I don't have many eyebrows, first of all, so it didn't feel that long, but I think maybe to people it felt really painful to watch. I did a version of that piece where my husband plucked my eyebrows off while I said, he loves me not. And that was, you know, in your head and your heart, you've worked the piece and you think it will do this in front of an audience. But that piece where Ryan plucked my eyebrows off, people felt like they were complicit in watching an erasure or a form of abuse, which was like a form of it I never expected. But I also know I don't need to pluck my eyebrows off anymore because they're not growing back the way they used to. But I think too, what I love is we live kind of in a time of such amazing formal expression that the conversations I would have when I would wear these was always really, people wanted them. But it is like to live with them. I mean, I was really hyper aware of when I would feel it start to slide and I didn't want them to break. But I do show them with the image, the photograph, and the object next to it. I think it needs the context. And I like the relationship of the two. But even how I've chosen to show it here, it's still half. I think about that too when I show my works and how they sit on a screen and live on a screen, is that I want to make sure there's always the half thread going through pieces. I think too, I was making work about hair and how can I make work about hair if it's always been long, luscious, beautiful. So I went through the process of turning part of my body into an object, and I cut my long hair to look like a bowl rested on top of my head, and then used this blue spray paint that you use to spray on your body for like sports games, and decorated it with blue and white patterns. And I think every Asian kid has had a bowl haircut at one point. It just showed our mothers cut our hair at home and how awkward it was. There are like websites, Instagrams, Tumblr pages devoted to the Asian bowl haircut, which is considered a genderless haircut when really all haircuts should be genderless. But when I was in Berlin, everybody had a bowl haircut and it was super cool. And I don't know how that happened where like my bowl haircut growing up was super cringeworthy. And then after this, my hair was fried. It could not be dyed back. So I shaved my head and I navigated the world with a shaved head and no eyebrows at one point too. And that was something too, to almost be like a walking performance in a way, but also the conversations I would have with people coming up to me about not having any hair. I think a lot of times people would come up to me and ask, like, what does your husband think of your shaved head? As though I needed his permission to do this. And I think I had the best response, and I thank my loving husband for that, is that my husband, who grew up in Hawaii, when I did this to my hair and shaved it, and I went to a barber shop to have it shaved, he told me he couldn't wait to take me to the island so I can go jump in the ocean and feel what that ocean water feels like as it runs down my head. And so I would tell people that when they would ask that, and they would be like, oh. But I thought that was really beautiful, and it did feel great.
That's a pretty good response to be able to give.
Yeah, I thought so too. But I think it's also like, I think for a lot of people, they didn't understand, why would you do that? Like, remove the one like kind of symbol of femininity most people are familiar with. It also, I think, is an identifier of health and mental health wellness. Like, if we like continue to see like one more story of another woman who shaves their head because someone broke up with them, like those stories are perpetuated, and that it is really empowering to shave your head and live kind of freely in the world. But
yeah. Well, I guess too, speaking of this performance and even pluck, you know, and you sort of alluded to this already, that like the work, what happens afterwards when you're in the public realm, that's in some ways part of your performance, right?
Yeah, when I had a shaved head, I have this like really tender story. I was like in a TJ Maxx, and a woman came up to me who I'd seen there many times. She works there and has alopecia. And she came up to me and she turned me to her, and she took her hands and cupped my elbows. And I've never had anyone cup my elbows. And like, we were looking at each other very intensely. And she's like, I just want to let you know that you are really beautiful. And then walked away before I could say, like, I did this to myself. But like, I also felt like I needed to hear that in some way too, because I think like too, like every Asian kid, my hair grew out super awkwardly. And
Right.
I like had a hard time with that part where it like hung out an inch before it started to lay flat. And there were times like I really, I felt like I had to justify it, answer for it, and also just explain that,
Right.
yeah. So without any hair, I started, and I had gone to China with a shaved head and no eyebrows, which no one knew how to place me there. Every time I've been to China, people can usually recognize, and I hear them say it in Chinese, her eyes are Chinese, her nose isn't. But this time with no hair, no one knew how to place me. And this is where I met a hair dealer who rides around collecting ponytails of hair to take to hair markets in northern China. I learned more about the human hair industry and the trade, and how Asian hair holds its value at hair markets because genetically it can withstand many different chemical processes. And this is where I learned more about how Asian hair can be bleached, crimped, curled to mimic other textures. And I started buying wigs off of eBay. Wigs that were under $50 that were made in China, which even when we say wigs are made in China, we have to step that back and say the hair comes from people in China, and that they were of styles I culturally and ethnically don't own. So like here, the Afro. And I was really thinking about these conversations of cultural appropriation, appreciation, and does cultural reappropriation even exist? And that in these portraits, I can appear racially ambiguous. They are done alongside these porcelain trays with blue and white combs, where the blue and white patterns have been kind of washed and smeared, so they're not clear. And I think I still show this work because since 2016, the layers of conversations of this have changed and built and have been built upon. And I think I am a cusp of being a millennial, and millennials are the most racially diverse of any generation before us, and how that keeps growing with Zennials and Gen Z, that like, what are we allowed to own or claim? And thinking too of how I started thinking as an artist that I don't know if my work is timeless, but I definitely think this was made for this time and to continue on with these conversations. And I had first shown this work at Art League in Houston, which is a really amazing small nonprofit space. And I had a totally different haircut at that time. And so when I'd walk through the gallery, people didn't know it was me. And I would hear the pockets of conversations happening around this work, and like, they were asking each other, is she allowed to do this? How does this work live on? How does this work? What conversations does this work bring up? And I really think about how, you know, in the context of hair and beauty, Black and African women propel the hair industry, still based off of Eurocentric standards of beauty, but from hair that comes from the poorest of women all over the world. And that those communities don't see that money that happens from this multi-million-dollar beauty industry. And so I just wanted to like insert the other part of this conversation, the women who grow their hair for labor, that slow growth that happens where women sell their hair. And then they really, I think, really thought about that labor where I look at these figurines which depict the stereotypical China girl in a mode of labor, carrying that heavy shoulder yoke across her back with those baskets. The rice picker's hat is to protect her face from the sun. And the stereotypical China girl bob hairstyle, and that she's barefoot. That this figurine came from a hobbyist mold from the 70s that probably lived in the realm of kitsch and hobbyist objects, but today has a much different meaning. And that she rests on top of like a trophy case of broken blue and white willowware shards. And willowware, I read, is considered one of the most appropriated blue and white patterns in the world. It has this same imagery of cranes, willow trees in the background with a certain key block pattern. Everyone I've met has had a grandmother that collected willowware. It's something I still look for in thrift stores, and as soon as I find it, I turn it over to see what country it came from. Because as willowware traveled the world, with the kind of loose Asian imagery on it, like in England, the willow trees would be replaced with rose bushes, and how it kind of became appropriated to different countries in their aesthetics. And I think about the global migration of that willowware pattern. Exotic was a name I heard my whole life. I've heard men call me this. I've also heard it on the playground being called, and it usually come with some gesture of someone pulling their eyes across their face into the gesture of slits. AF is the exclamation point at the end, and it's even funny when I first titled this piece AF, like kind of the older maybe clay communities I would talk to had no idea what AF was, and then like my students' age knew right away what it meant. And I don't know where it stands now. I think I think I cringe a little now with the title of this because it very much places it in 2017. But I also think it goes back to this was made for that time.
Right. And so, I mean, knowing that that AF is maybe lost to its meaning or its original meaning or immediate meaning, what does that mean for your work in the future? How do you envision dealing with that? And I also think about a lot of the aphorisms that are in some of your other works that I know we'll see later on, but knowing that language changes, right? Culture changes. How do you wrestle with that?
I think about that all the time because I love language. I will sit there and think about a word. One like pluck, I thought about forever, and like how it applies to everyday acts, but then how it's connected to the body. I think about those hashtags, slang, as also global migrations. I think my last trip to China, when I talked about this piece, like Chinese students knew what AF was, and like how African American vernacular, I think, is what I think travels the world and is really important to like acknowledge that. I do think this was made for 2017, and I'm okay with this being slightly cringe for that time, but I also think this was exactly how I was feeling. This kind of like, there is a point where I felt like I was reclaiming exotic in a way. So I think in that like phase of reclaiming words and like thinking about how communities help each other and arm each other along the way, this was one of my installation for my residency at Art Pace called Thick, and this was also the space that Felix Gonzales Torres occupied as one of the first Art Pace residents over 25 years ago. And in some ways, this is an homage to his beaded curtain that was installed in this space. This is made from synthetic red hair. And I have a relationship with a hair factory in China that helped me procure this large amount of hair. But I was thinking about how do we help each other as we cross daily thresholds or enter new room, or how do we engage with new audiences, or how do we establish communities? How can we help each other cross like metaphorical thresholds of going from girlhood to womanhood, or being a woman and entering all male spaces, or being a person of color and walking into all white spaces? What are affirmations or things we can tell each other to help ease that crossing? And so this is very much modeled after a red velvet curtain, the kind of curtain that a performer stands behind with not knowing who the audience is on the other side. And on the either side of this curtain are works too that talk about objects of power and how we are complicit sometimes in empowering those objects, and just how to reclaim objects. So two on this beaded curtain are beads from Jinjin, China, which I worked with a factory of women who their sole job in the factory is to slip cast, trim, and make these beads. And what I loved was spending time with them, and that, you know, they wanted to learn more about why my nose was so big, but also I wanted to learn more about like what made them happy every day, as they would do this same job over and over, and they would laugh and smile, and like their sense of community in that factory. And I worked with Art Pace to hold community sessions, to have people come in and adorn the beads with affirmations that keep them going. And then I collected some on social media that like ranged all over the world. And so some are really regional, like a San Antonio one that came up very often was "You Got Ganas," to my favorite one from Finland, which was "One potato at a time." A German one was "Only a sausage has two ends." I had people help me write affirmations on beads too, so it wasn't just my handwriting. And the people that helped me all told me a lot of them came from RuPaul's Drag Race. So I love that that RuPaul's Drag Race has empowered so many to live in their full beauty and truth, and empower their existence. So I think there's something really beautiful about that on there. And then I really love one from a young boy who was 9 years old, and he wrote, "Be the boss of your body." And so I really love that this young child was being taught consent at a very early age. And that on either sides of this curtain, people would have to talk or engage with the other person on the other side to read the full bead. So then when that happened, that bead, that expression got spoken into existence. And that is a part of this I didn't intend, but I love knowing happened. I think too, this is where a shift in my work happened, where I was working a lot with blue and white, and then I started working with red. We lived with red so kind of violently during the last election, but I grew up as red in my household as a very lucky color. And that I continued to work with the hair factory, and they helped me make and produce these this installation of red welcome mats. And sandwiched in between these red welcome mats is the stereotypical China girl figurine. And Live to Die was a prompt about fulfillment centers, those big, large Amazon warehouses or Walmart warehouses that we can so easily and quickly order something and it show up within hours at our doorstep. That Live to Die was an expression I saw a lot of on alphabet samplers of the 1800s in this country. Alphabet samplers are considered the first form of female education in the United States, and Live to Die was something like 8 and 9-year-old girls were stitching alongside their ABCs, and I thought that was such a simple, powerful statement. And how did these young girls know that this would transcend their time, their timeline, and their life to be such a powerful phrase? Typically, these mats say welcome, and they're on the threshold of every Asian business, welcoming you to come in and do business there. That I was thinking about the weight of labor and thinking about those statements like made in China. And often when it's said, we think the things that are made, we equate with cheap or not good quality. And that I think about, why is the Black, brown, and yellow labor in this country valued less than that of things made of American labor? And also, who gets to be American? And that I come from a long line of service industry Asians. And so I felt this really hit home for me when I saw this image floating around social media, and this was April 30th of 2020, the beginning and kind of super scary times of the pandemic, where I watched these protests happen in San Antonio and in Texas, demanding that hair salons and nail salons open right away because people really wanted those haircuts, but never considered the labor or the labor of the people who are at risk for doing those jobs to provide a beauty service for you. And I think this is where things started colliding, and like my research and the things I collect, and this image of the original Oriental bamboo back scratcher has sat in my iPhone album for actually longer than 2018, but I knew when I saw it at my local Walgreens, there was something there. And I started making my versions of back scratchers. So they're porcelain with long red fingernails adorned with crystals, and I scratch your back, you scratch none. Is very much about how I watched definitely my community show up at the riskiest times because they could not afford to not work, but to do jobs like gut your fish, wash your clothes, trim your cuticles, cut your hair, and raise and watch your children. All jobs that I saw the women and men in my family do. And I just ask that you consider the labor behind the mask that provides you comfort and care to make your life easier and more beautiful. And then thinking too, how do we have these spaces to commiserate, comfort, and care for one another? And I think about the Bave Cave is a blue hair structure that covers a blue and white porcelain table. I think too is in rejection of man caves, that why do men need protected spaces for them to rest in domestic spaces when the labor in domestic spaces should be shared? And so in Babe Cave, you can come and do that. It is this was made in collaboration with a table factory in Jindazhen, China, where the husbands throw the tabletop on a wheel and it's 3 feet in diameter, and their wives would paint blue and white. I stayed in the factory for 3 days painting my version of a blue and white table with uteruses, because I love how the uterus is on everything now, from bumper stickers to t-shirts. The Venus of Willendorf, the fertility figurine made for a woman. Peaches as a symbol in Chinese culture for longevity, but also the cut peach in a way is like how that longevity is drying up. And chrysanthemums, because they are one of the flowers that survives the first frost, so a flower of survival. With affirmations, I continued to collect. I think I really live with let go of preciousness, and like I think working in porcelain, there is association of it to be delicate and dainty and something you have to keep as a precious object, but I think there's some kind of resilience there I really love, so I let go of that preciousness every day. That there will be pain, like don't try to hide that, and truth before the flowers. And that even when this piece can be acquired by LACMA for their Chinese art collection, people will still ask me if I think I'm Chinese enough to have my work in there. And I think my response is, who gets to be an American art collection then? And that there are, and even working in the field of ceramics, there is a really interesting like things that live in the hobbyist world. So these are clay colors of skin colors made for porcelain dolls. And that I've been collecting the Asian skin color for years. Like 10 years ago, it was called Oriental. Then it was called Asian, and now it's called Sahara. So even like Crayola crayons, the color colorization changes as we change and hopefully grow and learn. But Goat Girls are porcelain ribbons, very much modeled after the ribbons that ponies and horses would receive at shows. My favorite book growing up was Black Beauty. I loved horses, and that there is something about why young girls love horses, because we see them as these wild, free animals and like their hair blowing in the wind. And that was something too I thought a lot about in making this piece, that I love wherever it's installed. I always get pictures of young children standing by it and holding their hand up to it and trying to find themselves in these pieces. And I think that was very much reminiscent of me trying to find a doll that looked like me. And that we are the greatest of all times, like in this work. And that as I navigate like womanhood, I think about this sense of heaviness, and that still too often we keep hearing stories of being the first in spaces, and thinking about how women have climbed social ladders and professional ladders, and they're still sometimes the only one in these spaces, and how this idea of adornment is something we choose. Like I can choose jewelry every day, but some of these places we're at, we don't get to make choices. And also the extra labor that is imparted on us in these spaces. So Heavy is my version of a pearl necklace, but made with concrete beads instead. I had heard pearls too have a really interesting history and story, but the pearl necklace is a status symbol in some way. But I think many women are burdened with the concrete pearl necklace. And that how do communities of women, how do we protect and support each other? And this is where I had this idea for these garniture of blue and white pots. Garnitures are a collection of vessels with similar styles that live together, mostly on top of like armoires or heavy protected furniture. And when I visited the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, which has a really amazing collection of Delft, so blue and white from the Netherlands, all their garnitures were displayed on top of really tall armoires or chests and cabinets. And like, I wanted to look at them, but they were so out of reach and unattainable to me. So in my garnitures, they are intentionally installed high on the wall with a plexi shelf, just barely where I can touch those tassels or braids of hair. And in Ache Like a Woman, this is where I feel the elders of our community are undoing their braids and bringing their hair closer to us, so that in Break Like a Girl, you can see they're installed high, that we can protect this sense of girlhood and place them high on a shelf to let them be. And I think too, in this performance piece, Tame, I was thinking about the horse braid that gets pulled on horses as they are domesticated, and that I think I'm just really mad and frustrated that we have not overcome more as women. That I think about the cultural, social, and political systems that continue to still hold us back, even with the small things we have done to move forward. And I think about too, like in this piece, hands come from out of the frame to pull and tug my hair, which as a little girl, I was told if a boy pulled my hair, he liked me. But also pulling of hair can be an act of sexual aggression. That even though I am constantly being pulled or tugged back, that I need to protect my community. And that is represented in the baskets of figurines that I'm holding, that I still need to carry them forward. And I think we all do that for each other in our community. And living during a time too, the pandemic, where I saw my Asian family and community get blamed for the pandemic, blamed for the spread of it, but also to live in the time of the violence against Asians. I also wanted to make work to help us, I also didn't feel like we needed to share our trauma all the time for us to be seen. But how can I also tell our history here in America, when so much of when we talk about race, it's black, white, and we exist somewhere in other. And so We Climb is made from hair, synthetic hair, and porcelain beads that takes on the form of the ladder, that inspired by this cartoon throwing down the ladder by which they rose, which was centered around the time of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which barred Asians, especially Chinese, from coming into the United States. So I wanted to throw down my ladder that allowed us to climb, and that on the beads on the ladder are adorned with affirmations from the AAPI community to help encourage us to keep going. I also, too, it's inspired by the story of Rapunzel, where she lets down her hair to allow others to climb. And so one of the affirmations I got a lot of was, I am so proud of you, something that we didn't necessarily hear from our families, but we're all trying to tell each other too, and that it's okay to express those things, and that also to fuel up, because this is a really, really long, hard time. And that in part of my practice, I think of how I try to reclaim expressions or sayings. So during this time, I heard "Me Love You Long Time" come up again. And that for me, I heard it a lot growing up. And that in the moment I would hear it, it was where I was recognized as being whole. And then that was something to be recognized when you have a slur being thrown at you. And as someone who is half or both, it always catches me off guard. But "Me Love You Long Time" came from the Stanley Kubrick movie Full Metal Jacket, where a Vietnamese sex worker approaches a group of soldiers. It was also a Two Live Crew song. And that I, at one point, probably loved that song and didn't even realize what it was until I continued to hear it in not the best situations. And so this is a neon sign, very much modeled after the neon signs in Asian businesses. It has a reflective surface, and it is to remind you to love yourself a long time, because it's the only way we're going to get through this. And so I want to thank you, and one potato at a time, y'all.
That was really terrific, Jennifer, and so informative. Thank you so much
Oh,
for
thank
sharing
you.
your work. We have started to get some questions in, and one that has come in is a greeting. Hello from Grounds for Sculpture. What's your biggest feeling you hope to convey through your work?
Why does that feel like such a simple question, and I need to have like a really big, thoughtful answer for? I think the biggest feeling is I hope you ask questions. I hope you pause for a second and think about the history you were taught, and that the history you know, and the histories maybe that have been silenced, and that I hope the feeling you get is a moment of reflection to pause and ask these things and maybe unravel it a little. Maybe I want you to feel a little uncomfortable. And that uncomfortable is a good thing.
I definitely, yes, the work most definitely makes one stop and feel that discomfort, right? That you experience on a regular basis, that many people experience on a regular basis.
Yeah, I would say when I was in grad school, one of my professors described my work, and I'm still trying to figure out how to unpack that, but they described my work as like a woman that has a bruise on her face, and that she covers it with makeup. That from far away it looks fine, but when you get closer, you can see that bruise is there being covered up. And I don't know if I would explain it that way or use that form to explain it, but I do think about how I want the work to be presented in some ways as maybe controlled or perfect, but when you get closer to it, the things start unraveling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that unraveling in that there's something wrong, there's something really painful here, there's something beautiful here, and maybe there's a tinge of humor too. Like I try to create many entry points for the work so that everyone can see themselves in it in some way, but yeah.
And I think the power too is that you're often riffing on objects we see all the time in our life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that we know that, I mean, people understand that it's not like you're making this up. These are things that we see everywhere and that we encounter all the time. And it also makes me think a little bit about the research that you talk about when you mention, maybe not tonight, but in previous discussions, I know you've talked about going through eBay or to vintage stores, and that you're picking up things, you're looking at them, you're purchasing them even sometimes. And I wonder, like, what are the things that you do collect, and how have those maybe filtered into your practice, or how do they influence your work?
Oh yeah, I think I'm a very organized hoarder of objects of the past, and I think I know I'm trying to think if I collect for pleasure or for inspiration, and that might be two separate things. Like I can easily say like I really want to collect chihuahuas and kittens. That's like my fun part, but I think I feel so connected, and I love working in ceramics because it is, I feel like, a people's history, because everyone has something ceramic in their home. So I have a collection of really racist and insensitive Asian figurines. And I would say now they just show up and on my doorstep. I think I kind of like spend a lot of time on eBay looking at them, and I feel in some ways buying them because I feel like I should keep them and keep them out of the hands of wrong people. I keep them in some ways as a history of our depiction as people. Instead of going into so many homes where they sit on a shelf and are fetishized. I have a collection of wigs that I get from estate sales, and those I've been collecting those for like 10 years, and I still don't know what to do with them, but they live on my studio shelves because they are perfectly curled for when the person intended to wear them again. And I know all the histories of them too, like what estate sale they came from, and a little bit of the woman who owned them.
You track that.
Yeah, I write it down because I do think those are really important stories. Yeah, I think too, maybe in a way, it's absorbing a little bit of their essence in they are such deeply personal things, and part of me is like, why didn't the family want these? I feel like those are just as special as like their family jewelry or something. But yeah, I keep joking with my friends and family that my studio will be the best estate sale. Antonio, if you like all these really odd, weird things. But yeah, I have a really great collection of Chairman Mao figurines from every trip to China from one maker. But they're Chairman Mao, it like as a farmer or swimming, not in his necessarily iconic image, and they are made for the tourist market. But what I love about these is that first, it looks like I'm a Mao sympathizer when you come into my home, but I am not. I think my family fled China because of Mao, but they are made in a way that takes him down. It also makes him more human in a way. But I think too, I don't know if that maker is still there because I haven't been back to China in 3 years. So I do have a really great history of porcelain objects that I collect.
And all always displayed.
I know you can't live with it in a box, and so I also joke I have like very little 2D artwork on my walls. I just have a lot of shelves of stuff, and that I can't go anywhere without even a restaurant picking up the dish and turning it over to see where it came from. I think just having a curiosity of where things are made and the stories they tell from that really little label on the bottom.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a history of people and of trade, of so many.
Yeah, and also of the factory. I think we think ceramics or anything made from clay is, when we think of factories, we think of automation, but any cup, even the cup you get at Target, many hands have touched it to make that cup, which is so cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that too in terms of labor and value. Yeah.
God, you sound like a curator. I mean, it's always about the stories that objects can tell, right? That,
Mhm.
and so you're speaking my language.
Oh, thanks. I think, yeah, when people come over, or when people did come over before, I can tell you about almost everything in my house, because I also think how I get things too is really important. And I would say that like San Antonio has a very small clay ceramic community, which is really amazing. But I think maybe because I was only one of the few, no one ever saw my work as like hobby or craft, although I love the word craft too. But I think for a while, if you Googled San Antonio ceramic artists, my name would come up. And then I would get people would email me and be like, my aunt died and she has a whole overglazed china painting studio. It's not enough for an estate sale. Do you want to come over? And I'm always like, yes. If I hear, I've gotten so many of those emails, and yeah, I feel pretty fortunate to have access to that, but also to meet like and get to know a little bit of his families who also lived with like their family's obsession with like painting cheetahs onto dinner plates, or yeah, it's good.
Okay, so we've heard about your collecting and your work, and I guess one of the things I always like to hear about is also like what is the project that you most want to do, like your dream project, if you could do whatever that might be.
Yeah, that's such, I know, part of me feels like if I want to speak it into existence so it happens, but then part of me like wants to like just bury it in my sketchbook even deeper. And I feel like, I mean, I feel like in some ways I feel I'm living it a little. Like Art Pace was a dream. That was like a dream. I met a residency at the John Michael Kohler. I'm working in a toilet factory, which is a dream. But I think my dream project that I've kind of been obsessing about is my piece Enter the Dragon, that is on display at SAMA, is like just a small panel of a reflective mirror with porcelain nunchucks on it. And it was very much inspired by my childhood hero, Bruce Lee. But the scene in Enter the Dragon where he at the end where he's about ready to fight his foe, but he's in this room full of mirrors, I would love to do a large installation room of mirrors with objects that, because there's something in that scene I think I so identified with, is that it's how you present yourself, but also the reflection that you see, the reflection that comes back to you, but also when eyes meet you in that reflection, very much of like when you're getting your hair cut and you're talking to the stylist through the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to do a large installation of pink mirrors. Yeah. I don't know what that looks like, but it's like, yeah, I dream about that.
Yeah, it seems like that kind of reflectivity is filtering through a few of your works, and I guess building up to this large
Yeah.
installation.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I really will always be an object maker. I think that is how I came to be an artist, was learning how to throw pots on a wheel, but then also learning how to make molds and how to slip cast, and then how to make objects. I just think I think about then how to display objects in other ways, like on the body or through performance, or through installation. So yeah, to see objects distorted in a mirror with your image, it's kind of, yeah, thinking about that.
Okay, well, that sounds pretty great. I look forward to hearing how that develops.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what you'll end up doing at the Kohler. You never know. You still got what, 4 weeks?
I have 2 more months.
Oh, even better. See,
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I feel it's such a privilege to be there, and also to learn the stories of the factory workers too. It's also physically the hardest residency I've ever done. So I feel, yeah, there's some muscle memory coming through this that it feels good to play and experiment and have that time and space to do it.
right. Absolutely. The most precious things for any artist to have.
Yeah.
Well, Jennifer, I thank you so much for giving us some of that precious time and energy to come and speak here today. I know your residency is incredibly important, and so we are so grateful to you for taking the time and chatting with all of us.
Yeah, thank you, Elyse. Yeah, thank you so much to the Carver and Ruby City. Appreciate it.
And you've taken the words right out of my mouth, which is that I also want to thank the Carver Community Cultural Center for partnering with us on this series, and thank they and their staff for helping to promote the event and participating today. So, and then again, I'm going to say it again, but thank you, Jennifer, for doing this and sharing so much of yourself. This is, it's so precious when an artist shares their work, but I know maybe even doubly so for you because it's also so deeply connected to you, to your family roots, your family history. And I really do appreciate how open and willing to be vulnerable you are with your audiences and in your talk. So thank you for sharing so much of yourself with us.
Thank you. Have a great night.
You too.
Okay, bye.